Good evening, everybody. My name is Mary Conlon, and I'm the founder and co-director of Ormston House, which is a cultural resource centre in Limerick City. I'd like to welcome you all to this event as part of Terra Incognita, a solo exhibition by Damien Flood. So Damien and I know each other for about 8 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We met when I was working at the Green and Red Gallery in Dublin, and Damien started working with the team there.
Give you an idea of where our relationship started was that the first publication I did for my first show at Green and Red, I was looking for a text for it, and I've been talking with Mary, I guess, for various gallery reasons, and she kind of said that she kind of was doing some writing. So I just thought I believe in that sort of, when you meet someone just almost randomly, that's kind of the best way for things to happen. So that to me just seemed like a sign. I was like, okay, would you be kind enough to write a text for me? So I think about 2 months later, she emailed me with this text, and it was just this very lovely text, and it was
terrible.
Damien Flood work does
terrible.
This and that, and it was very complimentary, and I just kind of politely emailed her, kind of going, it's a very, very nice text, but it's not really what I'm into. I don't find that interesting.
And you said enjoy yourself with it.
Yeah, so. I remember you rang me, I think, then later on that day, kind of going, what did you think of the text? It seemed like you weren't too into it, and I was like, not really. Like it's very complimentary, and the usual kind of, harking on about, I don't know, how pretty the paintings were or something like that. So I just wasn't really mad about it. But Mary said then, she said she was like, well, actually, I kind of been working on this other text that I just didn't know if you'd be into. And I was like, okay, well, you send me that on. And I think about 20 minutes later, this text arrived in my inbox, and it was just amazing, completely out there. I think one of the headlines, one of the paragraph names was Trash Metal Planet. And I was like, the second I seen that, I was just like, okay. Because you sent it to me with a note that I think a friend of hers had made on it, and it was in this purple text. And I was like, if it's possible, we're not going to change anything of this, this kind of dialogue that you had with some, I think it was a friend of yours in England or something.
Yes, yeah.
Professor X, by the way, does exist, because I think the text ends with Mary in conversation with Professor X or something, or Dr. X or something. So I guess that gives you an idea of where I think our conversations began, that we kind of have had this ongoing kind of conversation, and we've had a brief lull for about kind of 2 years now, I guess, as we've both been quite busy with different projects. So Mary invited me down to Ormston House to do a show down there, and for me it was an amazing opportunity to exhibit in a space that was quite different. It wasn't the typical kind of gallery space. It was it was a very unique building, and there was the story of the first elephant in Ireland was exhibited there. So it had quite a heritage in my mind, and something to follow. But I remember with that show, throughout the years leading up to that, I was trying to build up a language within paint and kind of build up a dialogue that I could use to kind of create different paintings and express different ideas. So this actual painting exhibition ended up being kind of the kind of, I guess, what do you call it,
it's a turning point, really.
Yeah, but it was also kind of the penultimate exhibition, as in all the language that was built up over these years was kind of starting to merge together. And for this show, that everything came together. All the language I was using, all the different painting approaches were sort of jumbled in. So this exhibition ended up being kind of, I guess, examples of all these different languages using all brought in together. So there was some of my favorite work in it, and some of the work I absolutely despise and never want to see again, that I have subsequently hidden a lot of that work. It's only in print now, some of it's kind of gone. So I thought it was an interesting show to kind of maybe discuss in relation to this exhibition, because some of the language that's used in this show began there, this economy of paint began in that show, specifically in this kind of guise, I guess.
Yeah, for me it really felt like the starting point. You've really refined a very distinctive, you look at a Damien Flood painting and you know it's a Damien Flood painting. It's a very distinctive language that you've developed, and for me the Theatre of the World was a starting point for that. Like you said, there was quite a range of things happening in that show, and it was quite theatrical, and it was a sort of a cabinet of curiosities, as you described it at that point. I remember you saying it was a really important show in sort of realizing you need to hold back, or a more kind of a reductive approach. You described it as at one point of applying paint to the canvas, but there was a generosity to it. It wasn't just trying to withhold information.
I think that show, I took off all the limitations, and some of the works in that show ended up being, I think, very, very heavily loaded, like with a lot of information, a lot of different paint applications. I was kind of using influence from Van Gogh in there. There's a lot of this kind of almost pointless application of paint that was going on as well. So there's like these two kind of juxtapositions between these like heavily layered paintings and these very, very reductive paintings. Like some of the most reductive paintings I think I've ever done appeared in that show. One of them in particular, Smoke Ring, which for me was this sort of, it was one of those works that you went to, right, that's something I want to try and get to. But I knew I wasn't going to repeat that painting very easily, so I didn't really bother trying to, and left it on the back boiler. And I think kind of, Infinite Plane in Dubai and this show, where the two shows that language really started to come to the fore, this economy of paint and economy of language. And for me, it was a lot about trying to get paintings that were open to being read. They weren't closed off paintings. I think there's two types of paintings you can make in a way, and one's a closed off painting that won't really be read any other way than the one specific way you create. And then there's open-ended paintings, and I think that they can be read in multiple ways. And I guess with my practice, that is my main core interest, is asking questions of the viewers and keeping a real economy of paint. And I think through saying less, you kind of, leave more open for people to kind of read into. And
when to stop is actually quite an important thing, that you stop just before it's finished, and that's when you know it's finished, if that makes any sense. And sometimes you'd go to apply paint and go, oh, I've gone too far. I'm closing it off. I'm not leaving it open for people.
You never want to hit the wall. That's the way I look at it.
Okay.
You want to just stop just before the wall.
And
if you don't, it's over.
So after this show in Limerick, the Theatre of the World, how do you kind of recover from it? Because it's a very emotional process, and I've heard a lot of artists talk about after a solo show, that slump, or that kind of difficulty of like, how do you start again? Because you had realised that something was changing in your practice. So how do you? It's a very practical question.
Well, I think I've always been very lucky that I've always had shows coming up. Like, straight after that show, like, I knew that I had an upcoming show in Green and Red. So although it was kind of, I think, over a year and a half away, that was always in the back of my mind. And I think there was shows in between that, a group show in Italy as well coming up. And I think the show, I actually had my first few shows abroad straight after that. So I had a show in London and Germany as well. And those two sort of little small group shows were real eye-openers. When you start seeing your work outside of Ireland, it really changes how you engage with your work yourself. You start seeing it in a more global context, and you start seeing how the language you're using reads against other forms of art and other international artists' language. So that kind of started to really change my way of thinking about my work. And I guess kind of for the Green and Red show, there was a lot of sorting out issues and problems that had kind of come from Theatre of the World. I think the most amazing thing that show did was it kind of threw up so many problems for me to sort of solve, that it was kind of it was an exciting time to sort of be dealing with them. And I think when you can name a problem that you're having, it really gets you so much closer to solving it. I think it's when you're stuck and not knowing what it is, you're kind of snookered. And I think coming up to Theatre of the World, I was trying out a lot of different things, but I couldn't figure out what was kind of annoying me or irking me about the images I was making. And it turned out to be that I was enjoying experimenting with paint so much that I was just putting everything in, and that kind of doesn't work for what I want to achieve. And I think Infinite Plane was one of those shows that I was so we're skipping on now, I guess. I'm skipping on in my head already to Infinite Plane show I had in Dubai, and the time scale for that show was very, very tight. I was lucky enough to get offered a solo show in Dubai, and for this show I decided to do a 2-week research trip to the country, to the UAE, and see Dubai and the surrounding areas, and that kind of had a huge shift in my practice as it changed how I researched. Before that, for Theatre of the World and other shows, I would have mainly researched in my studio, reading different books and having conversations with people in a very loose manner, like not research way, but just discussing ideas. So for that show, I was physically over in the country, feeling the heat. It was like close to 40 degrees, I think, most days. So I knew the smells, everything, and I guess for me, strange things started to happen where experience, like visual experience and sensory experience, as in smell and talking to people, all started to merge together when I went to make the work. And I guess people have asked me, like, how do you make work from a sort of research trip like that? And for me, it was a case of just going into the studio and just start digging. Like, I mean, and the only way I can describe it is kind of like an archaeological dig through your own mind to sort of start trying to find out what you're interested in, because I made no presumptions while I was there to what my agenda was going to be, to what my area of interest was going to be. I actually had no idea. I'd literally wake up in the morning in the hotel and pick a point on a map and go, I'm going to try and get there today. And the first day was a complete failure because I like to walk, and there's no footpaths in Dubai. They were physically building them while I was there. I'm not joking. I was trying to get to Palm Island, walking there, and I got kind of halfway there. And there's guys actually laying the road in front of me. I was like, the most surreal thing ever. I was like, hurry up guys, come on. I was like, I want to get there today. So I had to turn around and then go back to the hotel. But for me, that was one of those experiences that I really, some way kind of came in. And I think one of my favorite experiences that stayed with me and became a very significant work in the show was this guy brought me out into the desert, and I'd never been into the desert at all. And he was kind of like, ramming me up and down like these like dunes in his big buggy thing. But he was just like, I think he was Pakistani or something. He was a very larger than life character, and I was sitting right in the back, like being bounced around, and he just kept on going, Damien, you see this over here? And these like big gestural arm movements, and like really like just larger than life. And this kind of little painting called Guy came out. It was just his gesture of his arm kind of swirling up. And again, it was this real economy of paint and language, and it started wrapping this kind of interest I have with the written word as well as the kind of visual language, and the kind of slipperiness of the two. And like a word like guy is such a strange sort of word. Like, I mean, I'm not 100% sure where it comes from, but it's a term for a male. But like if females use it as well when they go, hey guys, and it suddenly loses its gender, it becomes gender neutral. So these kind of slippery words, but so that research trip changed how I worked. I mean, through the sort of actual general experience of it, it became reactionary when I was making work. So all these ideas started bubbling up by themselves, and I think the time frame was tiny. I had 2 months to make the entire show, from coming back from the trip to the work having been shipped off. I thought I had much more time, but then it turns out shipping internationally, which no one tells you, takes a lot longer. So I suddenly get an email going, yeah, we're going to need that work to ship by and I was like, what? So, which is good though, because it made me stop before, it was finished. So, in some ways it was the best thing, take the paintbrush out of my hand, and the work was better for it. I think I would have overcooked it.
I think that's interesting, because I always remember when you arrived in Ormston House, and we brought like a section of works from the studio into the space. But you had it mapped out in the space, because you knew the space quite well at that point. Yeah. And you had this like very fixed idea of where things, the relationships between works, and with the architecture, is quite distinctive architecture in the space. And you're like, no, and I was like, oh, this could, and you're like, no, these belong together, and this should go here. And you really had you know, such a sure plan. But it sounds, by the time, the experience in Dubai, that it was much more, you were reacting to the experience. And when you brought the work into the gallery space, did you have the same sort of plan, or were you a bit more free to kind of experiment and move things around in the space?
I think there was different things going on, as in, you know, I'd exhibited so much since Ormston House and that show that, you know, you stop doing the safety blanket things like you used to do. Like I used to, like, when even Ormston House, as confident as I might have looked, I had like 54 works with me, you know. So how confident was I don't know. I was like, something's going to work. It's like, oh yeah, Mary, they're definitely going together, you know. No, there was certain works that I knew had to live together because they communicated together. But with Dubai, there was, you know, I could only ship a certain amount of work, so I had to edit them down. But also, I'd done a series of studio visits with people before that, and that kind of, in a way, was quite amazing because I was editing them to show them to people, and they were responding to them. So I was starting to get this kind of extra view on them, and I was starting to see them properly as well. So, you know, it kind of got whittled down to 15 works, which is still quite a lot. So we just shipped them, and then there was a gap of maybe 6 weeks before I got over there. So there was a nice period of time where I wasn't seeing the works, and I'd seen the gallery space twice before that, so I kind of did know the space. But going in there, like, I mean, I guess I kind of had worked a way that I now kind of install all the time. Whereas I just put on headphones and make a really nice playlist and just start moving works around, and it's similar to how I paint. Like, I paint the exact same way in this kind of rhythmical, intuitive manner. So it's quite a fun way to work. You know, it's like not taxing, and you know, that's how that kind of I mean, I think it was the fastest hang I've ever done. I think the work was laid out within 2 hours and hung within another 3. You know, and wow. Then it was just a matter of getting the lighting right. But so all that stuff just kind of rolled into it. But I think it's because it was one of those. It was such a definite experience. There's no two ways around it. Like, everything about it was completely, like, the research was definite, the painting was definite, and then the install just had to be then, because, you know, everything was quite succinct. So it was easy in a way, which was a surprise to me, because going over there, like, I definitely, like, I was worried. Like, I was worried for many reasons. You know, I was making work that was inspired by an area and bringing it back to that area, and locals were coming to view it. So there was this kind of nervous thing where are people going to turn around and go, what's that all about? You know, or do you realise you've cursed on your canvas in their language or something? You know, something really stupid. Like,
it's interesting because, you know, because we know each other for 8 years, and I've kind of seen this development and refinement in the thinking and the painting. So I feel I have quite a strong overview of this development. But there was an interesting text written about that show in Dubai by this lady whose name
Rachel Bennett.
Rachel Bennett, who's based.
She's
in
English, and she moved to Dubai to start writing about art.
So initially, she found it quite difficult. It's quite difficult, quite complex language. But actually, her frustration seemed to have quickly turned into, she was quite excited by that, actually.
We did have a talk. She kind of went to see the show twice, I think, and then we met, like, on the third visit. We had kind of about maybe 40-minute conversation. So she did kind of get some background on it, but she found it, I think, quite difficult to begin with. And I think a lot of people do, and I don't know if that's got more to do with people reading painting, though, than just specifically my work. I think there can tend to be a little bit of a thing where people tend, you know, my experience, you tend not to go to a painting show with the idea of reading the work. They tend to sort of go with maybe slightly more formative concerns, or think that the work might not really be about anything, that it's just like, I've had people say to me before, like, oh, your work is about something, it's not just abstract paintings. And I was like, yeah, that's why I've done 3 publications that are all text-based. You know, it's like, you know, I'm quite interested in paint language and visual language, for that matter. But there tends to be this kind of, I think, duality that paintings hold, where, you know, there sometimes, I think it's mainly in Ireland, there tends to be this slight resistance to reading work, where we're even with Rachel gone to see the show in Dubai. She didn't just go in and go, oh, I don't get it. she read them, she looked into them, read the titles, you know, kind of sat with them, and I think, you know, as you know, as sort of deliberately open and tricky to read my paintings sometimes are, there usually is enough information there to kind of read something into it more than it just being an abstract painting. Like the titles are very much, you know, succinctly titled, that they do, you know, they'll either mislead you if the painting's a bit too easy to read, or guide you if the painting is a bit more tricky. In my mind, again, it's quite subjective, but
we've actually
yeah,
had conversations over many years, which kind of brings us in nicely into this show, I think, because this is quite a different approach really to developing a body of work, which was interviewing and gathering stories excuse me, from people in the area. So this is sort of a new departure. It's like people you mightn't have known before,
yeah,
or who you didn't know before.
no, I didn't know. Yeah. Moving on from the Infinite Plane show, the open call was given for Dunleary, where it was to produce a body of work that had, you know, a base or a connection to the area. And when I seen that open call, I was quite keen to sort of delve into the research method that I'd started in Dubai, where I wasn't really interviewing people, but I'd met people along the way, and I was quite interested in you know, meeting more people, I guess, and taking the research outside the studio. So for this open call, I thought it was a good opportunity to propose that, to question what it is to know a place, and to sort of look at I guess people of the area and ask them about the area, rather than kind of look through textbooks about the history. So I was lucky enough to get the commission, and I started interviewing people, would have been, I guess, started talking to people maybe late November, and then Christmas happens and nothing happens. So it wasn't until sort of January that started getting these actual interviews rolling. So the process for me was exciting, but very, very intense. I'd never interviewed people, and I naively was like, it's grand, it's having a conversation. This was sitting down, pen and paper, recording device on the table, and actually asking questions. And you know, I had my tentative list of questions that, like, once I started interviewing, I was like, all right, well, that's not relevant, and I don't know what that says, you know. And like the people were coming up with these amazing sort of rolling stories, and you really have to think on your feet, and you have to kind of be you know, empathic in a way, and you know, and some people would come out with very personal stories that would kind of throw me, and you know, and you're also you're trying to stop your brain going off into sort of research land and going, oh, how's that going to play it? Am I getting anything? Is this going to inspire work? And that actually took me a while to really stop that and actually just enjoy the experience for what it was. And so I ended up with like hours of kind of recordings. And
how did you meet these people? Were you put in touch with them, or did you seek them out?
I did an open call for meeting people actually just in the room there, and then the people the Dunleary Arts Office were amazing at putting me in contact with people, and then when I'd meet those people, they'd kind of maybe know someone else, and you know, we were kind of lucky enough to get a private tour of the ferry terminal with Simon Coates, who's well, I don't know if he's still the harbour master. I think he's might be finished there by now, but so we did an interview with him, and so you know, and he was nice enough to kind of put me in contact with someone else who was writing stories about the area, and I kind of also parallel done a call out for people to send in written stories as well, like with hopefully inevitably to produce a publication of kind of work produced this year that will, you know, hopefully include some of these stories. So there was lots of different information coming through. So I think, yeah, there was information overload without a doubt.
Oh yeah, and it's interesting that you chose this title, Terra Incognita, so this unknown land. And it's interesting how this is, like, through painting, you're looking at sort of mapping the area, but through individual experiences. As a sort of like gathering these stories, but also your personal responses to them, or stories that things triggered for you personally.
But there was also
a
this
sort of an external memory.
But there's this thing as well
device.
that kind of hit me, is that like a lot of the people I spoke to, you know, it turns out like most people that are kind of younger didn't want to really share any stories. Maybe they didn't have stories or weren't at that point in their life to sort of look back. But a lot of the people I did speak to were kind of, 60 plus or in their 80s, some of them, and they were amazing. Like their stories were unbelievable, and their memories are like a billion times better than mine. Like the people are able to sort of name the people they sat beside in school when they were like 6, and I was like, I can't even remember the people I was beside in college. No memory. So maybe that says more about me and my lack of memory. But there were some amazing people. The thing I found is that they're talking about this time that I have no frame of reference for. So they're talking about, oh yeah, we used to have like pigs in our back garden, and we had a lady who bought the electricity came to the area, and a woman bought 2 washing machines, and you'd rent them off her for an hour to do your washing. Like, so all these like crazy stories I have no frame of reference for. So they kind of got quite altered in my mind. So when I went to paint, like they would get very, like they'd transform completely. And like I gave a guided tour to some of the contributors of the stories, and one in particular, one of the paintings called Ragman, which is kind of at the back there, that comes from the story about the ragman who used to come to the area and collect rags and trade them for an apple or something. And they're telling me the story that this is when they were like 6 or 7 years old, this used to happen. So my mind just took a leap and a jump off a cliff, and was like, the ragman, oh my God. I just had this like kind of quite ghostly horror story in my head about the ragman. So, and because she's telling me that she was 5 or 6 when this is happening, like I'm kind of seeing it in this kind of more sort of whimsical kind of fairy tale way. So, that's something I didn't perceive happening. Like I had no definite kind of agenda. Again, like always with my research, I don't have an agenda as in where I want it to go, but that's something I didn't realize would happen. And I guess something else I didn't realize would happen is that a lot of the journey became very self-reflexive. Like I grew up in Bray, and kind of I knew Dún Laoghaire. I used to go to Dún Laoghaire Art College, and so I would have known it through that. And I lived in Glasgow for a few years, and so I wouldn't, known it dropping in and out. But my when I was younger, I would have known it as Rainbow Rapids. I would go go on to Rainbow Rapids for the day. It was like a big exciting thing.
Kind of interesting that we're sort of in these kind of digital habitats now, if you will, and we're striving for this idea of perfect memory, that nothing is forgotten, nothing will be lost, and yet there's all these extraordinary stories of that kind of sort of maybe older generation of, do they get lost? Do they slip?
Yeah, I think as well that what happened was I did talk to a couple of people that were around my same age bracket, and their stories were, almost like parallel to mine, and like our formative years were all very similar. Like it was like the grunge time, and and as I was talking to one person in particular, and they were like, because I was going, your teenage years, what was that like in there? And he was like, yeah, well, it's probably like yours, like in a smoke-filled bedroom listening to Nirvana. And I was like, yeah. It's like, yeah, that's not really going to change, is it? Like I could be talking to someone in Wicklow Town or Northern Ireland, and it's probably going to be the same. Or you talk to someone in New York, it would probably be the exact same, just without the Irish accent, or probably with the Irish accents, But so that I guess that sort of area of interest became, of research became very familiar, and so that I guess maybe that didn't interest me as much, because I think that exhibition would have been very different. So I guess what happened to me was I started realizing and getting this idea of a kind of identity crisis within Dún Laoghaire. The genesis of Dún Laoghaire was the port. The place didn't exist before that. So it stemmed out from this, and even in the sort of 60s and 70s, it was a very active port, and that's slowly being sort of stripped away. And like as I was saying to the contributors, I would have known the ferry terminal as the booze cruise. When we were teenagers, we used to get the trip to Holyhead, and you just drink there and back, and that'd be your day spent. So I never had. Yeah, did you never do that? No. You'd have one pint in Holyhead while you waited for the ferry to load up and turn around.
And they just turn around and come back.
That's great. But that was my kind of notion of the ferry. I didn't know any of its grandiose kind of history. Like so, I found that it was fascinating. There was one story, and one of the women I was talking to was telling me about, I think it was maybe during World War II, there's all these orphans from Germany that were came to Dún Laoghaire, like, and she said there's all these like little kids, kind of like about 5 or 6, kind of coming in, like she had hundreds of them, like just coming in off the ships, and they had these little boxes around her neck, and they're all walking along. And now the woman telling me the story, at the time she would have been the same age, she would have been probably like 6 or 7, and she said she remembered feeling jealous of them. And I was like, that's the most strangest comment I've ever heard. Like, and I was like, why? Why do you feel jealous? And she was like, oh, well, we didn't have a little box. And it was kind of as a real sort of, you know, like as much as like I was hearing all these amazing, you know, stories of community and a much more integrated sort of life, and you know, it was a tough time as well. I mean, I guess it was one thing they never kind of, like the people I was talking to, never kind of let me get deluded by it, that it was an incredibly poor time and tough time. And you know, just jumping back to what you said there about this kind of, you know, digital age maybe that we live in, that's something that really struck me as well, talking to the people, is that they would talk about their community so tightly. They wouldn't speak about this kind of global economy or world. Like, it was literally Dún Laoghaire. Like, I was just talking to one woman, and she was like, yeah, like we didn't know Bray, we didn't know Dublin. Like, it was Dún Laoghaire. That's what we knew. Like the idea of another country, which she said was an abstract notion. It wasn't something that we had. So like everybody knew everybody, and there was a real sense of community. And I was saying to her, yeah, I mean, like, you know, talking to them, that really did start to dawn on me, because I think, you know, that morning, you know, I woke up and checked my phone, and like it was like, you know, terror alerts in Paris or something, you know, and you're completely, you know, hit by this like sort of seismic shift in the world. Like every morning there's something happening somewhere, so you're kind of on red alert or, you know, anxious constantly, and they're kind of, they wouldn't have you know, had any of that. It was very much a, you know, a community, and you know, what you were going to have for dinner, or you know, who's getting up to no good, or you know, I didn't want to sort of the show to be sort of melancholic or dwell too much on sort of past things. I wanted it to kind of be to reflect, you know, the personalities I met, but also this kind of, there is a sort of sense of kind of you know, rejuvenation. You know, I mean, there's definitely, like if you go down to where the old library is, there's like, you know, fantastic things happening down there. I mean, the place is coming back alive. So
I think there's always been, yeah, really interesting cultural projects here. And just when you said that, I think of like, say, Captain or Playground, where there is that kind of very contemporary playfulness, but these are from stories from 60, 70 years ago, or let's say this harbour master who's now retiring, or these women in their 70s who are remembering this playing together in this playground when they were 6 and 7. So I remember you said that it was really important that there wasn't a melancholy feel, because...
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there was actually a show made before this show, so I kind of made about kind of 10, 15 works, and at that point I had this kind of information overload from all the interviews, and I was really, like, to be honest, struggling with this kind of exhibition. I was like, how am I going to sort of distill this information into the work successfully? And yeah, and I also knew that people from the area were going to be coming here, and that was like weighing quite heavily. But
it's a pressure, isn't it?
There was,
especially when you're listening to local residents, like their stories.
Absolutely, and I think kind of I got to a point where the work was getting quite heavy and layered and kind of a little bit clumsy, and I decided just to destroy all the work. So I kind of took a Stanley Lay to them all and just took everything back, like just kept the stretchers of course, but re-stretched them all and started again from the beginning, and tried to kind of take that pressure off and be a bit more light with the touch, and you know, because it was a privilege, like, you know, like the award for the show kind of gave that actual freedom as well to have multiple canvases and not have that pressure. Like, you know, it would have been with my first couple of shows at Green and Red, like I needed 15 paintings and I had 15 canvases. So, you know, you would work on those paintings and you couldn't really afford any more canvas if the painting didn't work. So that's partly where a lot of this layered work came from, was just like no money to kind of do another painting. So,
yeah.
So, you know, with the Dubai show and this show, I luckily had funding or sales of work. So I was able to really do the work as kind of really get that lightness of touch, where a lot of this work, the canvas is probably the biggest player. You know, you can physically see the canvas like shining through, or in areas it's actually it's naked. And other canvases, that is the biggest kind of thing about it, is the canvas is the most most important thing, if you will. So I think kind of it was important that, like, as well with the research and with the actual paintings, I didn't want to just do these paintings that were sort of illustrative versions of the stories. I definitely didn't want that. Like, one of the main, probably the only rule I had was that the exhibition still had to be art, if you will. Like, it had to be an interesting experience, and and hopefully a confusing one, and one that brought up questions, and kind of made people hopefully kind of question the relationship between paintings, and and I guess actually I must point out at this point, one of the things that happened with that decision as well to sort of restart the work was that for up until that point I was trying to kind of make work that was just from these sort of stories, like, so I had to have this almost nautical theme, and that really wasn't working, and I wasn't letting my own stories kind of come into it, and I guess that decision to sort of lighten up everything and kind of maybe just take all the rules off, apart from the art one, that let my own kind of stories in, because a lot of the time when you're talking to people, you can't help but it be a very self-reflexive experience. They're talking about something, it's reminding you something else, so these kind of strange sort of formative experiences kept on arriving, like the importance of the phone box to a 16-year-old kid, and these kind of changing roles in our society, where especially because when I'd be asking some of the women, like, so what was it? These women are in their 80s now, but I was asking them, so what was it like when when you hit your teenage years, when you're getting older and started dating, and they'd get so shy and sort of like, oh no, well, one doesn't talk about that, and but like these, like, before that they were all like, oh, having the crack, and like, so expressive, but you talk about that, and there was this really, really, really beautiful kind of shyness where it's like, that's when he started courting, blah blah blah, and she started courting, and we went to the cinema, and it was all very kind of, it was very like it was very like warm and kind of like kind of cute, like I was sort of clammed up, so but that would make me think about my teenage years, which were kind of like I guess much more open, and there wasn't this idea of marriage, courting and marriage and house and kids. It was kind of just like do whatever you want, and and that made me think about kind of the role of the phone box, where you'd be ringing your teenage girlfriend from there when you were teenagers, going, oh, are we going to meet up, or you'd be meeting your friends at the phone box, and I was talking to another friend of mine about it, and he was like, oh yeah, I remember, I remember, like, he's a bit older than me, but he was saying he remembers when he was a teenager, his girlfriend lived in England, like, and he didn't have a phone in his house at the time, and he'd have to guard the phone box at 4 o'clock when she was going to ring. So it was a really strange experience of like, are they going to use the phone? Are they going to use the phone? No. And when he was telling me this story, I was like, Jesus, yeah, I remember that, when you'd be waiting on the phone call from a friend, mobile phones. So, those sort of stories started rolling into it. So, and that kind of gave it gave a different voice as well to the work, that kind of lifted it from this, I guess, very literal place, because the stories were so strong, and the personalities were so strong, that there was a trickiness to kind of open up the work and not have it so locked in, and definite. I mean, I kind of want them to be definite, but definite in an open way. I didn't want to create closed off paintings. So
might be time maybe to open the floor to questions, if there are any questions from anybody.
Well, I mean, I don't think there was an intentional kind of like decision to kind of pick certain stories. Like my way of working would be very intuitive, that I'd kind of just like, I'd almost just pick a color and paint it on the canvas, and I'd kind of rub back into the canvas or put down a line, and that would suggest something. So there was this kind of almost way of sort of digging through the ideas that were were naturally there. So it's kind of almost like this idea of getting to this, like, the subconscious, to sort of like just almost to see what kind of really resonated with you. So there was no pressure to kind of get definite stories in. But I think with the information that would come into the paintings, there'd be this point where something would start happening with the painting, and I'd be like, okay, I can see this coming through, and that would start to connect with maybe a thought I had or a story I had, and so it'd be just like teasing out the idea, but not going too heavy on it, you know, to sort of leave it open and just put in enough information that I started to see this kind of reference point to a story or to a feeling or to an attitude, or you know, so yeah, it kind of there's no definite kind of decisions made as in I have to let this story in or I'm not allowed to put that information in, but it was more of a case of always trying to keep them open and that they didn't get too literal, because I think it could have been very easy to do sort of these very literal translations, but then that wouldn't be, you know, my artwork, if you will. So my artwork is always kind of, you know, has 1 foot in research and 1 foot in painting. So, you know, they're always sort of that general balance act.
I remember as well, we had talked at one point about the Italian writer Italo Calvino, who I'm a big fan of, and his editing process, and how he'd always go back and just kind of strip back and take out, you know, the adjectives and very emotive words, and he would continuously, he was very rigorous at editing and taking out anything that was unnecessary, and then he actually found that but through this process, actually it opened up a lot more to the reader, reducing down, that simmering down that you described in your process. He found as well actually opened up the stories a lot more. So I know we've talked about.
I think it's absolutely that, and like, you know, my kind of favorite writers are kind of, you know, economical, kind of reductive writers almost, you know, where you're left to sort of have your own feelings about it, where you're not almost told what to feel. It's just this kind of enough there that you can kind of almost bring yourself to it, and I think that's what I want with the paintings as well, that people can come and, you know, you can get my stories hopefully from it, but then there is also, you know, left up that you can have your own experience of it. I think I was trying to explain to someone my approach to this show was more akin to sort of making a soundtrack, you know, for an area, but a visual version of it, like, because it's a strange thing that, like, we completely fundamentally accept music, and music to me is one of the most abstract things in the world. Like, it's like there's no real book for it, you know, but we all have a feeling about music, like we get something from it, and unquestionably, like, we hear something and we respond to it, and be that a positive or negative, but everybody has some music they love. It's very rare that you meet someone that doesn't, but then when it comes to painting and visual culture, like, there seems to be a bit of a, I don't know about that, and you're like, but
a hesitation, or you know? I think a hesitation, also possibly sometimes a suspicion, and it's quite interesting. I to refer back to that point about the digital habitats, it's really interesting to see that, like, the new social media platforms that are really, like, rapidly accelerating in popularity, things like Instagram and Snapchat, which is purely based on the image, and actually text has been kind of thrown out, and younger generations actually aren't interested in the writing. They're interested actually in telling the story of their lives through images, where they're abstracted. I think it was James, I think he's kind of going that, like that my work as it's progressed has gotten slower, and in the sense that you have to sit with it longer for it to give over its information, where I think if you go back to the very first show that we worked on, you know, those paintings I think were quite instant. You go in and there'd be a reference point and you get it, and that'd be it. And I think the work is kind of, as it's become more open, that has slowed it down in its kind of reading, that, you know, certain paintings especially won't give themselves up, and some will never, you know, even some are mysteries to me, what they're fully about. I'm like, you know what I mean? That's why I notably named a painting in Dubai show, Sleeper, just because I felt something from it, but I wasn't 100% sure what the painting is about, and I still don't know, like, no idea. So, but that to me was kind of, you know, interesting. But sorry, to go back to the whole soundtrack idea, was that, you know, for the show I wanted to kind of mimic that idea of having little reference points, but also trying to get over a feeling rather than a very concrete idea, that it was kind of more so something you go in and experience this and hopefully come away with a different sort of mood that, yeah, would be kind of similar to kind of if you were to listen to a soundtrack, and sort of I guess I listen to you know, the different soundtracks from films and stuff, and, you know, without the movie, you're kind of listening to it going, what does that evoke now? And it does change
from the sort of visual. So it was that kind of, that idea that I was trying to keep in my mind while creating these works, that it's not everything had to sort of be wrapped up as well. So some of the paintings are very open, and you know, maybe need the other paintings around it to kind of finish their sentences, if you will.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, all the time, yeah, constantly. Like I can't paint in silence. I listen to it at very high volume as well. So it's kind of, for me, it's a way to focus. Like kind of, I think I need music, I think it's to get the energy up. It's kind of, I'm very
You're
mood
very
oriented.
physical in the studio as well.
I've been described as a buzzing bee by my partner. She worked in my studio once beside me, just working on something, and she said she couldn't do it again because it was just like flying around the studio, like moving paintings, throwing stuff, and then doing these kind of long stares. I'd be like, and then going up with the paintbrush and then running off like the most cliche person in the world, I guess. But for me, yeah, no, it kind of, music kind of gets gets the adrenaline up. Like I kind of listen to stuff that would be quite intense music, really, which is, it was quite ironic, I guess, to the work, because the work is quite calm. But I remember reading an interview with Stephen King, and he was saying he listens to nothing but kind of hard rock and metal, like a deafening volume when he's writing, and it's a way of actually blanking out the world. And for me, I was talking to James about this, and that we were talking about formative years and how they kind of influence the rest of your life. And for me, like, most of the music I listen to actually comes from those formative years, or from when I was younger. So it's kind of, it's almost like using music to create this like safe world to create. And another friend of mine, like, he famously said to me, he was like, our role as an artist is to stay young and to stay kind of questioning. And I was like, yeah, it's quite interesting, especially with my choice in music. Like, it hasn't moved past kind of my like teenage years. Like, so I was like, this very strange music blasting out of my studio that you're like, it's probably very uncool now, but.
So your music has stayed the same, but your language is changing and how you.
But the music kind of creates this safe kind of little world where I feel like free to just explore. And I think kind of when we're kids, we're not kind of crushed by art education or anything, and we feel a lot more freer just to do what we want. And as we get older, we get more rules put on us, and everything gets more serious, and you have to pay bills and horrible things like that, and you have to learn how to drive and stuff, and very scary things. And when you're a teenager, you kind of didn't have to do any of that. And I think that the music for me kind of awakens that kind of that side. So yeah, I mean, for me, like, the studio has to be a place of pure experimentation, and tempered with very tough criticism. But you have to allow yourself to kind of make these mistakes and try out something new. And like, fair enough, it's the most frustrating thing in the world for work to be failing, but that to me is the only time that you can do something different. Because if you're doing what you know how to do, well then, just go get a job on the production line. And what's the point in that? You'll just, I think it was a definition of madness is doing the same act again and again and expecting different results. So, if you're doing the same thing that you always know how to do, well then you're not really going to find anything new. So for me, yeah, you have to kind of open it up, experiment, and just endure those horrible periods of nothing working, and then erase them once they're gone. All you need is that one painting to work, and you erase kind of 3 months of pain. And you go, oh, no, it was amazing 3 months. That actually stems back to Ormston House show, Theatre of the World. Actually stems back further than that. It stems back to 2010. I was making work for the Future show in the RHA, and I bought a roll of black canvas. You can get it in Evans's art shop, and I bought a roll of it thinking it was the next thing. I thought, black canvas, it's going to just alter my work and be the breakthrough I've been looking for. And I done one successful painting on it, and then everything else just failed miserably because black canvas is just very tough to paint on. And so I had all these like failed paintings sitting against the wall with their backs to me, and just the back of that black prime canvas is what you see, and it's just this beautiful surface. Oh, that's the
Under the
rapscalene.
lights.
Oh,
You have to seal it, otherwise the oil paint will rot it. But it's just, it kind of looks like linen, but it's a little bit more kitsch, I think. It's a bit more awkward looking. And it's also a very rigid surface to paint on. So the paint reacts very differently on it. And it's also trickier to paint on. Like those paintings are made usually at the end of a run. Like I'll do all the sort of more oil on canvas stuff first, because it can flow much easier. And you can make mistakes and hide them. But on that canvas, you just can't. If you want the canvas to play true, you have to be definite about every act you make on it. And that's why, like, one of the paintings, like Martini Glass, one of the first ones you see on the right when you come in, that painting, like, is probably one of the most reductive in the show. But I think about 3 months spent, making those decisions, like sitting with the painting. And I think a lot of the work is quite meditative. And I think it's meditative because that was the process to making it, where like a mark would be put down, I'd sit and think about it, start another work, and kind of bounce between them. But there was these long periods of just sitting and, kind of almost asking the painting, what is the least amount of marks I can make and create a successful image, versus, keep on putting stuff in. Because I think every time you put something in, you're losing something as well. You're losing a potential reading, like, and as we were saying before, like, when you get to that finished point, if you've finished it, it's finished for, in a very negative sense. Like, it's kind of, it's in many ways become a failed painting. But so yeah, I think it's a slow process. I think I think as well that with the work is, I'd always try and give that sense of, kind of almost, it's a Renaissance trick where they'd, have someone looking off out of the canvas, and just that kind of play on that idea of kind of working out further or looking beyond. And I think with a lot of the work there is that play where you do feel sometimes that a part of the painting was left on the wall, and never made it to the canvas. So I think, but that pulls back into a lot of my work, which is, it goes back to these fundamentals of painting. And I think over time, and I think also, I started teaching a bit more over the last few years as well, and that's obviously changed how I think about my work as well, and has made me kind of maybe examine certain aspects of my practice, and has given me a bit more control over them, where before it maybe was a bit more like accidental, or I'd be just fumbling through stuff or finding something that worked. And now it's definitely, I think, a lot more meditative and slower, and I kind of sit with work for a lot longer than I would have before. I think it would have been made in a bit more of a craze before. Now it's I was a much more comfortable studio now, so I can kind of make work, put it away, start something. And I think that might have been something different with this work as well, that when something was halfway done and I wasn't too sure about it, it would be put into storage, and then I'd start on something else. So it would actually be a solid break, where before, when I was working, I wouldn't have maybe had as many canvases or the ability to store it. So you'd be looking at it constantly, and that is just like horrible. You're just like, you come into the studio and you just go, you again. It's like, where, I could kind of disown them now, and I could kind of just put them away and come in and just go, fresh studio, or, nice blank canvas. It's like, hello, my old friend. So, those sort of things that, you'd never see how they would influence or change anything, and I think they do. And I think moving studio changes how you operate. Everything does. I always find it amazing that Francis Bacon stayed in the same studio for most of his life, where I think one of the nice things is moving studio. I mean, it's horrible when you have to leave a nice studio, that's not nice, but it's nice when you end up in a nice place and you're like, this works, there's an energy to it. So yeah. I think they were briefed before coming to see the show that by me, that the contributors, yeah. I did brief them beforehand, saying, listen, this is my interpretation to your stories, the response, so it's filtered through me, so all the blame goes on me, and that they don't have any responsibility for what I've done. But they were very. I think they understood what I was, what I was endeavouring to do, and that that it was kind of more a reaction to the stories, and that it was a kind of more of a kind of, I guess, a visual sort of interpretation, or an emotive experience rather than a very literal one. So like most of them were really kind of complimentary about it, and they responded to different works in different manners. I guess an interesting response was actually from one of the daughters of one of the women, where she was saying about the painting playground. She was like, "Well, I don't see playground in that at all," and I guess my defence was like, "Well, I've never seen the playground." So this is one of the things that I kind of was quite aware of, that like even the cinemas that they were speaking of, there's like maybe an old black and white photograph, but I've no actual frame of reference for it. So, which in a way, sounds like a bit of a get out of jail free card, but it was a big play on it, that on the work, was that for something like Playground, I was responding to their relationship as a unit, as a group of 10 women that have been friends since they were 6, that have restored this house right beside where their playground used to be, and meet there twice a week. It was an amazing community. So for me, my thing was to try and kind of create that sort of play and that sort of feeling, rather than try and paint the playground, which I've never seen a photograph of. I don't know if there is a photograph of it. So I completely understood her response to it, and even after I explained that to her, she was still kind of like, I don't see the playground. I was like, the playground's not there. Like, I agree with you, the playground isn't there, that's not the playground.
It's interesting that it came from the daughter rather than through...
Because the women were like, oh, they were very open to it. They were very like, and like Tilly as well, the painting beside it comes from like one of their stories, which Tilly was like this, was the sup of extra milk you'd get when you went down to the milkman to get the milk for your parents, and if you got the Tilly, it would make your day. So, I just wanted to try and respond to that kind of feeling of, playfulness, of youth, of kind of, and also, when they were telling me that story, that kind of, it really struck me as, that's one of those stories that happens when you're a kid, that there's almost this self-awareness about that story, that this will continue on for the rest of my life, and it'll be one of these memories that I will tell to someone. And it made me think of my version of it, which is, I had a friend growing up who would notoriously pick the chewing gum up off the ground and chew on it. That was one of my earliest memories, is a friend doing that. It's like a horrific thing. So not as nice and romantic as Tilly, but yeah.
But that's interesting then, even the title of that painting is tied very specifically to...
Yeah.
I don't know, is that a colloquial word to this area, or is there...
I think it is, yeah, no, absolutely.
Which it does very much kind of geographically kind of, I suppose,
well,
in some ways kind of...
It kind of it nails it down, and what I loved about it was Tilly, it's a name as well, like, it sounds like someone's nickname as well, so it kind of has a very, human quality to it, so I like that kind of, because in that painting you can kind of see faces in it, and, there's a sort of gesture of, like, sort of spitting almost in it, so there is this kind of, sort of playfulness to it. So I quite like that as a title, that it was very definite to the people, to the story, but also had a very much an openness to it. And I think as well, it kind of felt like a name that I wouldn't naturally name a painting. Like, a lot of the names to the works in here are quite different than previous shows. Like the painting Kish is very different in the sense that that's the name of the lighthouse. So, but what I quite liked about that word was that Kish, it sounds very like kind of, if Sean Connery was to say kiss, like, so I quite like that it had this sort of, slipperiness to it. Like, I love words that are quite, open and sort of slippery, and Kish is definitely, well, then for me, I know people outside of Dunleary, or people that don't know that it is a lighthouse, there's a weird, like, an amazing ambiguity to that title, that I quite like that playfulness, and that painting has these like weird little sort of look like kisses on the painting. So there is that sort of, that if you spend enough time with it and kind of let your mind wander, you might get to the sort of distorted place where my brain lives. You try.